It's on? We'll start a little early today, guys, namely on time. I have a long story to tell you today that is part one of 3 or 4 parts, 3 or 4 lectures. I'll need to tell the whole thing. This is the story of Jean, the first person showing the pattern called multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder that I worked with. I've worked with a number since then. This is all preface, prelude right now. The story begins in 1974. As of that year, this condition, this pattern, was thought to be amazingly rare. There were literally only 4 reported cases in the entire psychological literature of the previous 100 years. So that's part of the context of my working with the patient, because it took me a long time, on the order of a year and a half, even to realize what I was dealing with. It's not that she wasn't showing signs, though, and I'll talk about what those signs were as we go along. It's more I didn't read the signs for what they pointed to, because I never suspected in my wildest dreams that I would have a case of multiple personality. They're too rare. What are the chances that some jerk psychologist in New Jersey, me being that jerk, is going to run into one of these rare, incredible things that never happen? 0, thought I. I didn't even have those thoughts. That was kind of implicit, pre-reflective. So it ended up she had to almost bang me over the head for me to realize what I was dealing with. And I didn't see the signs, although they developed as I came to know her pretty well in other respects. You might find this hard to believe, but many people who show multiple personality, no one really ever picks up on the fact. They can live whole lives and never be picked up on that this is what's happening. Even more strange and amazing, the patients, the people themselves may never know it either, because the alters so often have amnesia with respect to one another. So they're often the last to realize it, even when it begins to show itself unmistakably. Anyway, this is all prelude, preface, because I'm trying to get myself on my walk down memory lane back into 1974. It's almost 40 years ago. It's like 38 years ago. But many of the experiences I had that I'm going to recount to you are so vivid that it's almost as if they're yesterday if I put myself back into that framework of thinking and feeling at the time. So let me just try to do that. This is such a good story on such a bad day. Good Friday's not a good day, it's a bad day. Bad day in the history of humanity, wouldn't you say? This is a very fine story with a very nice ending, too, unlike some of the things that one reads about in this field of trauma and abuse and so on. Anyway, 1974. Here comes George Atwood, fancy young assistant professor. Only about, how old was I in 1974? Like 29 maybe or something. I was invited by a local, here in New Jersey, a local society for psychical research. That's parapsychology, ESP, all that kind of thing, to give a presentation. That was a very deep interest of mine during my student years, and it still carried forward into my early years as a professor. And so I agreed to give a talk. The request was they wanted to hear a lecture on the history of attempts to scientifically investigate parapsychology, telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis, and so on. And I knew a lot about that. In fact, I had a huge library of all that research. So I agreed to do it. So I went to a meeting hall. There were a lot of people there. It was like the local chapter of what's called the American Society of Psychical Research. And so I spoke for an hour and a half, and then came to the conclusion I come to on that. Although I'm very interested in the whole thing, if you look at the history of that field and you look critically, carefully at it, you come to the conclusion that the answer to the question, what has been established in our knowledge of ESP, the answer is the big 0. Nothing has been established whatsoever. There are experiments that supposedly came out and showed this effect or that one, but nobody can repeat those experiments. That's the problem with scientific research is you have to, if you're going to develop knowledge of the world through experimentation, the experiments have to be repeatable. They're not in that field anyway, but it makes an interesting story of the efforts, the different investigators, all this. So I'm rattling on. I gave a really wonderful speech, enthusiastic applause at the end. Okay, 100 people leave, and I've got all my papers in front of me, and I'm getting ready to leave too. And then I see there's one person in the very backmost part of the room still sitting in her little chair. And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she stood up, and she came walking up, and this is the person whom I call Jean, who eventually, and I'll tell you the story, became my patient. But I want to describe and try to capture my feeling of what it was like, just this very first encounter. So she was a short little person. She walked up from the back of the room to me as I'm collecting my papers and getting ready to leave, and speaking in a very formal tone and kind of way of the words that she chose. I'll imitate her a little bit. "May I please speak with you, sir?" And I had nothing to do, so I said, "Sure, of course we can talk. What do you want to speak about?" She said, "I have something that a man," I'm quoting her now, I remember this as if it's a tape recording. I have something to tell you that a man such as yourself might perhaps have interest in learning about." That was the language, kind of convoluted sentences like that. I said, "Sure, let's sit down." So we sat down in a couple of the chairs at the front of the room where I'd given the talk. And she proceeded to tell me about some experiences she had had for many years. What were they? Out-of-body travel. She described how, for a very long time, almost going all the way back to her earliest memories, she had been able, when lying down to sleep, pretty much at will, to let herself begin to drift off into a sleeping state, but before actually getting there, to lift herself, her spirit, her mind, her soul, whatever, out of her body and have it float up towards the ceiling. She could then look back and her reclining body was still there, with eyes closed. And she would be able to kind of melt into the ceiling and pass through it, and then travel and fly about in a disembodied state, visiting neighbors, listening in on their conversations, traveling around the whole county that she lived in and state, and even at certain times traveling across the ocean to areas of Europe and Asia. But then she'd come back, re-enter the ceiling and pass through it and back into her body, and then she'd have the night's sleep. So that's what she told me about that first night. And I was interested in this, and I didn't, it's a little hard to explain this, but it was a weird time in my life and a weird time here at Rutgers and at Livingston College in particular. There were lots of strange people, lots of strange faculty. I was one of the strange faculty. And everybody was telling each other all kind of weird stuff all the time. So this was not really that outrageous to hear something like this. So I listened to it. I was very interested in this. I've always had an interest in out-of-body travel, out-of-body journeys, disembodied states. What about that so-called astral projection? But we spoke for only about 10 or 15 minutes maybe, with her just describing something of her history of having been able to do this. And then she came to the end and she said, "So thank you for listening to me. I just thought you might be interested." I said, "I was very interested. Thanks a lot for sharing this with me." I did not in any way regard her as a patient, as mentally ill, or anything like that. It was just a weird person talking to a weird speaker who gave a weird talk on people who investigate weird phenomena and don't get anywhere. That's how I felt about the whole thing. So I didn't think anything else about it. So I just left. She left. We shook hands. It was all really good. She didn't look me in the eye. She was staring right down. She walked out and I walked out and went home. That's the first contact. Now in those days I had no life. So my life consisted of just being a teacher at Rutgers, and I was here, I was at my office with the door open like 14, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. So anybody could come and see me, and anybody did come and see me all the time then. I had no family, I had no friends. I was a new professor pretty much still. He kept here a couple of years, but not getting established very well socially. In any case, after about a week or week and a half after this first encounter, I'm sitting there in my office reading my weird books, being my weird self. And I hear a knock, knock, knock at the door, and there she is standing there in my open doorway. I said, "Oh, Jean." I remembered her name. That's not her name, but it's the name I give her in my stories. "Come on in." And she came in and she said, "I enjoyed our contact, sir." She kind of an attitude of extreme respect and shyness and not wanting to bother me, but having something further to tell me. She sat down and commenced to tell me some further events in her life that had an ESP quality to them, a parapsychological quality. She thought I might be interested. A man such as myself would perhaps have an interest in these events too, not only out-of-body journeys, but she had many memories of what she called telepathic name recognition. Since she was 5 years old, she had found she had a talent that most people don't have. She could look at a person's face and tell that person's name. And she recounted episodes in which she would go on a subway in Manhattan, for example, with her mother, age 5, age 6, when she was such a young girl. And it was an enjoyable game that she played. She would walk up and down the subway where all the people would be sitting there going to their next exit or whatever their destination was. And she would step in front of each one. And she would stand there like this little 5-year-old girl, and she'd say, "Good morning, Mabel." And the woman's name would be Mabel. She would be sitting there. And she'd laugh when she described to me how shocked how did you know my name? Then she'd go to the next one. "Hello, Henry, good morning. How did you know my name?" So she'd go passing down the sequence of people sitting there, blowing each one's mind, because she just knew. And it was some form of telepathy. So going with the other talent of traveling out of her body, she thought that was very cool. I thought that was pretty interesting. I didn't know what to do with it. She also had recollections of some episodes where she was able to move objects about by mental powers alone, so-called psychokinesis, telekinesis. Little objects on the mantelpiece would jump and fall off if she wanted them to. She said, "I've lost that ability now, but there was a time when I could make things move and jump and spin and twist and float." Okay? So she was 15, 20 minutes with me, regaling me with stories of these amazing phenomena. I was, again, just talking to a weird person. I was myself a weird person. I listened to this. And she would then leave. "Thank you so much. It was really wonderful to see you." A week later, she shows up again with more such stories. And I had a library of stuff that I thought, some of which might be relevant to her. So I found myself giving her 2 or 3 of my books, and I have to remember a couple of them right now. One of them was called Journeys Out of My Body by Robert Monroe. It's an autobiographical piece by a kind of self-made entrepreneur, zillionaire guy, who at the age of 40, having made his $200 million or whatever it was, decided he would just quit all work and devote himself completely to the single thing most interesting in the whole universe to him, traveling out of his body, and to announce to the world the importance of his discoveries that he was making and his ability to do this. I gave her another book called Theory and Practice of Astral Projection, which was a book kind of rooted in Hinduism and all sort of Eastern thought, and kind of the idea that that's a stage of spiritual development where you detach from your physical form and so on. And the young woman, Jean, didn't know anything about Hinduism, didn't know anything about the term astral projection, even though it's a term that refers to experiences that were very close to the exact ones that she was having. So she took those books home and read them and brought them back to me and began to bring other weird books that she had for me to read. So it was a kind of a little group of 2 centered on weird phenomena began to evolve with us. And she would come in every 4 days, 5 days, just never for more than 30 minutes, 20 minutes. She gave me the feeling that she didn't want to intrude on me. It would just drive her crazy if she was bothering me. So she'd come and I'd her, "Come on in, tell me what's new, what's new." I remember once during this very early period, she was staring up at the corner of the room in my office, and she looked at me, and she looked back at the corner of the room and looked at me again, and she said, "Are you familiar at all with the technology of electroencephalography, EEGs?" I said, "Well, strangely enough, I am, because I had been involved as a graduate student when I was in graduate school with dream research, where we would use EEGs to tell when a person is dreaming. The alpha rhythm is a sign of a dream taking place in a sleeping state." So I said, "Yeah, I know about that." She said, "Well, I have a suggestion for an experiment I'd like you to conduct, sir." I said, "What is that?" "Put the electrodes that normally would be affixed to a person's scalp up there in the corner, and then we'll have the machine here with the paper rolling and the needles are on that and so on. And I'll go into an out-of-body state, and I'll project my mind, soul, spirit into there, and we'll see if the EEG starts jumping around like that." Would you do that for me? Conceivably, I could have tried that with her. I heard a voice speaking to me from deep inside myself, don't do that. I don't know why. I just thought, I'm not going to do that. I just told her, I said, look, my research days are over. I don't do research on anything anymore. Measurements, electronic equipment, I just refused outright to do that. I'm really glad I did. Looking back on it, I don't know what would have happened if we tried that. And let's imagine you put the electrodes up there, she lies down on the couch and goes zzz, and her soul comes out of her body and goes up there, and let's say it flatlines. The thing is flat, which is probably what's going to happen in my reality anyway. What's it going to do to her? I don't know what it would do to her. Of course, what would it do to my reality if the thing starts jumping? You know, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? But I'm just telling you, having studied the field of parapsychological research, such experiments don't work. Okay? Or if they start to work, it turns out to be a weird thing going on in the environment. You can't do it the next day. Anyway. So she kept coming, and I just thought I had a new friend, a little strange friendship, and that was fine, you know. And I just really didn't give it any thought, and I did not. I mean, I should have and could have wondered whether this woman was very stable and maybe was suffering with some very severe emotional disturbance, which is often correlated with interest in weird phenomena. Anyway, but I didn't. Perhaps 4 or 5 weeks in to this little relationship around the paranormal, I was sitting in my office and I received a phone call from the dean of students of a nearby college where this woman was attending classes. I said, hello, and she said, hello, this is Dean Smith. Do you know a young woman by the name of Jean Jones, I'll call her? I said, oh, well, yes, I actually do. She said, well, we had an incident with her here last night, and your name came up. I thought, oh, shit. My name, an incident, and my name comes up, and I get paranoid immediately. What have I done wrong? I'm going to get caught for something. I don't even know what my crimes are. They're coming for me. But I said, well, what was that incident? She said, last night, Jean climbed out onto the ledge outside her bedroom in the dorm in which she was staying, 6 floors. It was the 6th floor. And she was found by her roommate sitting on the very edgemost part of that ledge, 6 floors up with cement down below. And the roommate had called the campus police, and an ambulance came, and they had to kind of coax her back into the room or grab her and yank her back in. It looked like an impending suicide, is what it was, and could have been. This was only a ledge about this big, and this woman is sitting right on the edge of it. And she denied. She said, I'm just out here getting some fresh air. What's wrong with you people dragging me back in? They didn't believe her. They thought it was a suicide gesture, almost the real thing, because she would be dead for sure if she fell. And so she was taken to the campus infirmary, and a whole to-do, her parents and all this stuff were called. But the next day, she had a meeting with the dean, and the dean informed her that if she was going to continue in school, they wouldn't let her do so unless she was in psychotherapy with someone, getting help for her emotional problems or whatever. And did she know anybody that she could begin such work with? That's where my name came up. Okay, she provided it herself. The whole thing that had happened up to this point might have been understood as some kind of overture to begin something anyway, obviously. But this was new to me, though, and I thought, oh my God, she almost killed herself. And then I thought back, well, of course, there's a big, tremendous emotional disturbance. There must be a horrendous depression inside of her. It starts to come out. This is all part of something. So the dean asked, would I be willing to see her? I said, well, I will not be part of something that forces anything upon her. That never works. But if she chooses to come to me and wants me to be her counselor or therapist, I would say yes to my answer to that. Later, she came to my office and spoke to me, and we discussed the whole incident. She still denied that she had been suicidal. It's bullshit, she said. She never say a word like bullshit. They're wrong in what they construed taking place there. I was getting fresh air, but I didn't believe her either. But it's okay. She's not ready to say it. But I said, would you like me to be your therapist? If you want that, I'll go for it. Why not? She said, I would like that very much. Okay. So the sort of terms of our relationship changed at that point to some extent, but not completely. Because in the ensuing weeks, months, and years, we always still had a shared interest in weird ESP and parapsychology and books and all this kind of thing. So that remained an important dimension of our relationship. It didn't ever stop. But on the other hand, I felt now that I had to get to know her better and understand the context of her suicide, her near suicide, whether she admitted to it or not. I had to know about her life history. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about that. And what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do here is kind of give an account of the opening stages and really a kind of overview of the first year to year and a half I had with her. And then I'm building up to the discovery she was a multiple, which was dramatic and amazing. So don't leave until you hear that. I'm just telling anybody who's getting antsy and so on, I'm going to tackle you if you try to go out the door and drag you back in and tie you down and make you listen. Big fierce George. Anyway, so I asked her about, I said, look, therapy, okay. We know each other already. We have a very friendly, wonderful connection already. Let me get to know you better, just in terms of your life. And so now the following interchange occurred. I again remembered it was kind of amazing at the time, and I'm going to give it to you. I said, Jean, give me a picture of where you're coming from, like your childhood and your background and history in your family and just all the things that have affected you. Well, let's start with, what would you say are the most important things or important people that have played a role in your development, making you who you are? Okay? And she answered in the following way. She said, the most important people in my background were the ghosts of my mother's dead father and my father's dead mother. I said, did you say the ghosts? She said, I said the ghosts. I said, yes. I said, well, tell me about the ghosts. How were they important and what were they like? She proceeded to explain that when she had been 4 years old, she was now 19, by the way, so I'm talking to a chronologically 19-year-old young woman, but she's got a multiplicity with a bunch of alters that are different ages of all different kinds. You'll hear about that as we go along. The first one today you'll hear about. When I was 4 years old, one night as I lay in my bed, they came. They materialized at the foot of my bed, floating there. The father's mother had died before she was born. The mother's father had died before she was born. But she knew what they looked like by the photos that were kept on the mantle in the family's home. And so she recognized them. And they arrived. And they floated over her bed and were kind of hovering close to her and talking to her. And they were very benign beings. And they said to her, and she gave this account to me, we have come to help you. We have something to teach you that will help you in the challenging circumstances that you will face in your life, said the ghost to a 4-year-old. And among the things that they showed her was the method of escaping her body. And they actually how ghosts do this, don't ask me. They reach into you and they pull your soul out. And if they do that repeatedly, you kind of get used to the emergence from your physical embodiment. And you're able then to fly autonomously. You're kind of made into a pure vision. There's no substance to your being, but you're a visual consciousness and an auditory consciousness. You can hear what's said, you can see what's going on, but you can't touch anything. You have no material form. No one else can see you're invisible completely. And the ghost showed her how to do that. And I said, well, tell me more about what the ghost did for you. What further did they teach you? Then she got this extremely serious look on her face. And the tone of her voice lowered, and she said, they showed me the field. And when she would say the word field, there was a tremor in her voice. The field. I kind of tried to imitate that by writing it this way, okay, it's the field. And so I said, what's the story of the field? She said, they showed me where it is and how to get there. And it's a wonderful place. And this is her words, her precise quotation. It's where I can go and no one can find me. And it's a wonderful place. She pictured it as or reported it. She didn't imagine it. She said she had been there. A peaceful expanse of grass and trees, running water, flowers, I don't know, butterflies or something. I don't remember butterflies, but she could go out of her body, and anytime she wanted, the ghost took her there first, but she learned how to do it herself, and she would go there. And it was a feeling of tremendous safety and security, because no one could find her there. Okay? She believed the field existed in physical reality. To her, the out-of-body journeys were real. To me, I don't know if they have reality. We're again in the realm of the large R and the small r. She was talking about things that don't fit into my reality. But I wasn't pathologizing her. I didn't have the theory of the big R and the little r and phenomenology all worked out at that time, but I operated on that basis. I just listened to what was said, and if this is happening to you, it's happening to you. Tell me more about it. So we talked at some length about her journey to the field and how it had been a lifesaver for her, but she didn't go that deeply at first into what it had saved her life regarding. I said, well, so tell me about your parents, though. What was, tell me important things, how have they influenced you? Which one were you closer to? And I remember her answer, and again, this is a quotation. Well, I was much closer to my father than I was to my mother. And I said, well, tell me about that. Why was that? She said, well, when my mother what did I say? I meant to say I was much closer to my father than my mother. Did I say that? If I didn't, I've changed it. Okay, whatever. Whatever I said, that's what it should be. Closer to Dad. Why were you closer? Because when he hit me, he had a reason. I said, the reason you were closer is because when he hit you, he had a reason. Tell me how he hit you and give me an example of the reason. And she then proceeded to tell me the story. And I've mentioned this story in this class before. You might remember it from an early stage of Hit Me, that famous case. She described how when she was a little girl, 3, 4 years old, she would take bubble baths. But she would play in the water, and the bubbles would be all built up. Sometimes they would slosh over the edge of the tub and onto the tile that was there. And her father would come in and see the bubbly water accumulating around the edge of the bathtub and kind of perhaps leaking a little bit into spaces in the tile. And he would fly into a red-faced, angry rage about the fact that the tile pretty soon was going to be buckling and have to be replaced, and he would grab her by her long, beautiful hair, which was down below her waist, and drag her physically out of the bathtub, pull out a belt with giant metal studs on it, and just beat the hell out of her. But that's the reason she was closer to him. Do you understand? Because there was a reason. She spilled the water onto the bathroom floor. The mother would beat her unpredictably, inexplicably, for no reason at all. I said, give me an example of how your mother hurt you and attacked you. She said her mom would come in from a day's work, and she would walk in the front door with nothing having happened at all, no provocation on the child's part. The mother's eyes would be blazing, would take off a shoe, a spiked high-heeled shoe, and throw it with all her strength at Jean. It would go whizzing by her face, sometimes hitting her, hurting her, injuring her. The mother also beat her terribly, but would just seem to do so for no apparent reason. Jean could never figure out what it was, so she felt closer to the father. This story is a story of unrelenting abuse, of emotional neglect, emotional and verbal abuse, and a violent physical abuse throughout. Another aspect of her abuse history is that she also had to witness the attacks on her little brother. She had a 2-year younger brother. And she recounted many instances where there would be a little too much noise at night. They shared a bedroom. And the father would come storming in a rage and just pound as hard as he could with his fist into the chest of the little boy, 3 years old, 2 years old. And she remembered seeing his body bounce 3 or 4 feet in the air. The blows were so violent and terrible. And the witnessing of the abuse of a sibling can be as abusive and violent and traumatizing in its effect as they're hitting you yourself. The vicarious experience of being not party to such a thing, but being a witness to such a thing can leave you tremendously hurt. So she was a victim of her own abuse from both parents, doubly a victim then because she had to witness what happened to her brother, who was basically destroyed by his parents. In a later class I'll tell you about his very sad eventual fate, not today. Anyway, so it's what you'd expect, though, because what would you expect if all you knew about a person is that they traveled out of their bodies to a safe place that felt good because no one could find them there? Would you predict from that they would come from a family that was nurturing and loving? Not too likely, right? There must be something terrible that they have to escape. She's telling me at least part of the story of what this was, and it's only part of it, though. Okay, so in the next meetings we had, I began to meet with her twice a week for about 50 minutes or an hour. She just would come to my office, and we would talk about her background, her childhood, about current events, about ESP, cool stories about out-of-body journeys again. Sometimes she'd talk a little more about the field and what happened there. There wasn't a lot to that. It just seemed like mainly it was a place of security and isolation. She also told me about how her favorite game as a child was to climb into the cupboards in the kitchen. They had apparently very extensive cupboards. You could get deep inside them, back behind the pots and pans, and that too provided a safe place that no one could find her. She'd hide in there when her mother would be looking for her. Mother wouldn't seek to look back behind all the pots and pans and so on. So there was a theme of hiding from violence that was very, very pervasive and prominent in the whole thing. It's a heartbreaking story. Another feature of what she began increasingly to reveal to me in these early weeks that we were meeting and months was how lonely she was. She didn't seem to know anybody. I mean, she knew her classmates a little bit, but she wasn't friends with any of them. She hadn't had any friends, ever, apparently. She said there was only one person that she ever talked to at all. And I said, well, who is that? She said it was a young man by the name of Freddie. I said, well, tell me about Freddie. A picture was then drawn of another student, a young man, who in return for Gene taking all his laundry and doing all his dirty laundry for him, would spend a few minutes just talking to her about how's life going or something like that. So the picture I had was this Freddie was using her, taking advantage of her to do his laundry for free, and he sort of paid her with just a little bit of attention. That was the only person she knew. 6 months later, I found out Freddie was an imaginary friend. There was no Freddie. Okay? Or there was a Freddie, but the nature of his reality he belonged to another realm or something. There was no biological, physical Freddie that anyone could see. This person was the most isolated, lonely individual I've ever met in my life. And she had been this way all the way back to her childhood. She wasn't totally lonely, though, because she communed with ghosts. Not just the ghosts of her mother's dead father and her father's dead mother. What she liked to do in the out-of-body journeys is travel to the Ukraine, where her relatives, her ancestors had lived. And then some of them eventually immigrated to America. But they were buried there. And she saw there were like Ukrainian mausoleums or something that had ancestors in them that were buried there or interred there. And what Jean would do is come out of her body in her loneliness and leave America and travel to the Ukraine and go to these mausoleums and would go in them. And the ghosts of the dead would be there too, and they'd have conversations, dialogues. They'd recognize her and say, Jean, come on in. And they'd kind of have ghost parties. She was in a ghostly form in the out-of-body journey. And so really she had a really unusual social life growing up, wouldn't you say? It was ghosts, not people. The relationship with people was abusive and violent and horrendous. You might get a little weird if you grow up just mainly with your contacts being with ghosts. And so there it is, all right? Also in the course of our discussions, her depression that had been there did come out. And she would kind of go in and out of a very, very deeply, deeply suicidal state. And she was able finally to tell me that she felt so lonely, so isolated, so much pain, with no possibility of connection to anybody else, that it just made her want to die. And she thought about methods that she could kill herself. And I got really worried about her, because as the thing surfaced more and more, I saw it was really serious. It would come and go, though. Some days it was there, some days it wasn't there. I began to wonder if I should see her more than twice a week. I was afraid I'm going to lose her now. But it still didn't occur to me that she might be a multiple. What seemed to be taking place is that I have a person. What I thought I was looking at was a person with just tremendous emotional neglect and isolation, an abuse victim of the first order, who's kind of living and dwelling in an imaginary world, or has done so, and survived because of that, okay. But I thought that was kind of the picture. I didn't know where we were going next in our therapy, but you want the story to come out, and you want to hear and understand, and maybe be the first person to really understand what's happened to someone. Certainly her parents didn't understand anything. They were too busy attacking her. So the whole, and then I obviously also began to see that she had begun to get close to one human being, and I was that person. I had unknowingly become her very best friend, and the best friend she'd ever had. She hadn't had any friends. There had been children; they had been abusive. She had been the target of abuse from other children. You'll hear about that later in another lecture. Some of her traumas that she had were at the hands of sadistic children that were around her that thought it would be a fine thing to attack this weird little girl. Anyway, but like I said, I didn't have any idea that she might be a multiple. But there's no possibility a jerk in New Jersey is going to see a multiple. It's like foreign old literature. We know now this is baloney. They exist by the thousands, as a matter of fact. But you have to know how to spot one. So is what it is. Now a whole different understanding of the whole thing. Looking back on that year of therapy that I had twice a week, sometimes a little bit more, struggling with her suicidality, hearing about the rich extent of her imaginary adventures, but just listening to that, building our relationship, sharing books with each other, reading different readings. She began to borrow all kind of books out of my library and bring me magazine articles to read and all that. So it's a kind of give and take and an exchange. And what it made me feel like is that she only felt okay when she was near me. And she had never touched me at this point. There was nothing, never any physical contact at all, but in the same room nearby. And she would tend to plummet when she was alone, but she would tell me about it the next time she was there. I honestly didn't know where we were going. But psychotherapy's like that. Sometimes you just don't know where it's going, so you just go and you pray and you hope that something will emerge that tells you the direction that needs to be taken. Okay? And so, now looking back on it now, I see clearly the signs of her multiplicity showing themselves to me that first year, but because I wasn't looking for it, I didn't see it. If you're not looking for something and you're assuming that something couldn't possibly be there, you won't see it even if it's in your face. That's a law of human perception, just the way it is. Until it blasts through the ignorance, it's there. What were the signs? Classic. The main one was this, losing time. And she used the phrase losing time. By the way, that phrase is also used by Sybil. The same thing. What does it refer to? It refers to repeating episodes of amnesia. You suddenly come to finding yourself in a circumstance and the last hours, days, weeks, or even months lost completely to memory. How did I get here? I remember the first time this started to happen and she involved me in it. One day I was sitting in my office. It would be like 8, 9 months into our relationship after we had turned to psychotherapy. I received a call as I sat there in the afternoon with my feet up on my desk. Hello. And there's quiet on the other end, and it's like, it's Jean. I said, well, Jean, how's it going? What's happening? She said, I don't know. I said, what is it? Tell me, what is it? What's happening? What's happening? Do you know where I am? I said, I have no idea where you are. She says, I'm at the Metropolitan Opera. How did I get here? I'm all dressed up. I've got pearls and earrings and high heels on. How did I get here? What's happening, George? That's a sign, boys and girls. Did George see that sign? No. I said, I don't have any idea what's going on. Your memory is playing tricks on you. Something's causing that. I don't know what it is. Now, I'm not going to... That story I just told you, multiply it by 15 maybe. There were 14 other ones like that where she'd call 60 miles from her home in her car, all packed up and not knowing how she got there or where she had been going. So the repeating episodes of this, and it's almost a surefire sign there's an alter who's doing something, and then that one disappears with the memory of what it was doing and leaves the other one holding the bag, wondering how this even transpired. Turned out one of her alters, you'll hear about it next time or the next time after, was a highly sophisticated, cultured kind of patron of the arts, and went to plays and musicals and dramas and opera and ballet and all this kind of thing. And the others didn't even know about it. But I didn't know that's what it was. To me, it was just like Jean having trouble with her memory. And I began to be frightened she had neurological problems, because repeating episodes of forgetting can conceivably be due to a neurological issue of some sort. I begged her to go to a neurologist for a test. She adamantly refused, wisely as it turned out. She had some problems you'll hear about, but they were not related to episodes of amnesia. The episodes were related to dissociative process. Okay. So there was that. A second thing that happened, looking back on it, I see it clearly, was that her predominant mode of presenting herself was one of great shyness, unobtrusiveness, quietness. She would come in and looking at the floor and wouldn't ever look up into my eyes. You could barely hear her talk half the time. She was a woman of very, very few words. But every once in a while, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times in that first year I was with her, she was completely different. She comes in, snapping her fingers. Hey, George, how you doing? Hey! Chewing bubble gum, blowing a bubble at the same time. Sits down in the chair, puts her feet up, legs all spread apart. It's not sex, it's just total, like, don't give a shit relaxation. She says, did you ever hear the funny joke about the farmer's daughter and the traveling salesman? I'm about to tell you. So then he tells me a gross, disgusting, just joke that is so bad that it's actually funny. I wish I could remember what one of them was. They were so stupid. She tells it, ha, 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 ha. And I remember thinking to myself, man, this woman is changeable. And I wondered, is this what they meant by lability of emotions? Like, I never knew what the word lability meant. Even when I went to graduate school, I kept looking it up. I could never figure out what it was. Does that mean changeable? Maybe she didn't occur to me there's an alter here. It was very different. It was very loud. It was very impulsive. It was kind of disgusting and intrusive, but also hilariously funny. And I never saw that. That is, later I came to see that. And you'll hear all about the emergence of what came to be known as the gene number 2 personality. Don't worry about that now. So what I'm saying is there were signs. Still a third sign was this. She came in one day during the middle of that first year and said, here's a question. Have you ever heard of the concept that everybody has a perfect duplicate somewhere in this world? Like there's somebody out there that looks exactly like you? I laughed when she said that because I had seen a guy who was my perfect duplicate a few years before this. It frightened me. I was in, this is boring, but I was in Sambo's restaurant in Tucson, Arizona at the time. This is back in about 1968 or something. Big pancakes, you know. They don't even have Sambo's anymore. It's racist or something, but they call it Sambo's then. And I looked across the room, and there was a guy looking at me. And I went like this, and he went like this at the same time. Then I thought I was looking at a mirror. I'm looking over to see oh shit, there's no mirror. There's an actual guy there. It freaked me out. And then it freaked him. I see he was freaked out in exactly the same way. And then I was really happy. He just got up and left. I think he didn't pay the bill. Maybe if you meet your duplicate and you actually touch each other, it's like matter and antimatter. So I told Jean that story, and she laughed at that story and liked that. I would always relate to her. You know, I have a good story about pretty much anything she said. I said, but what makes you raise this issue like that? She said, well, people keep coming up to me and they say, how you doing? It was so good seeing you last. I've never seen these people in my whole life. Let's try again next week, something we did like last week, okay, girl? That somebody would come up and say that. So she figures there's a duplicate out there. It's another sign. There is a duplicate. Looked just like her to other people. But it was an alter. I didn't know that, okay? I had zero suspicion. It can't happen. A jerk in New Jersey will not see a multiple. They have 4 in the whole literature. Here it is. So I'm going along, not knowing where we're going, a little bit worried about it, but willing to just ride the pony and see where it takes you. And one Friday evening, after drinking too many beers with my graduate students and fellow faculty members, because that's all we did on every Friday evening. We had no lives. We did our teaching. Friday afternoon would come. All the offices would get locked up. Somebody would go out and buy 2 or 3 cases of beer, and we just drink them all, right? And then stumble home, try to not have any cops get after us or something in the process, and collapse. And so I did one of those nights. I'm afraid you're going to think I'm modeling what you should be like, and I'm not meaning to. So I fell asleep. I lived alone in Highland Park at the time in a small little 1-bedroom apartment on South 2nd. I'm putting myself back into my memory now and the experience of this, and I want to really give you what it was like. And at 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night, I'm sound asleep, and the phone rings. Ring, 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 and I wake up, and hello, hello, hello. And there's a squeaky falsetto voice on the line with me. And I'm going to imitate it a little bit, and then after I imitate it, I'm going to just speak in my normal voice, but I want you to imagine it as a really high-pitched falsetto. "Hello, sir." I said, "Hello, who is this?" Silence. "Sir, I have something to tell you." Who is this? Then I'm thinking, I'm being messed with. Because I had been receiving at that time sexually harassing phone calls from women. Usually it's men who harass the women, but sometimes the man gets harassed by the women. And I found out later there was a couple of my students who had big crushes on me, but also thought it was hilariously funny to do this. They would call me up in the middle of the night and say, "George, do you know what we want to do to your body?" It was just ridiculously, but I didn't mind that. I thought it was funny. I would laugh. I would say, "Yeah, tell me what you're going to do." They would tell me a little bit. I said, "Well, what's all this talk? Why don't you do it?" They didn't want to do it. They just want to talk. Sexual harassment people are just terrible. So I thought it was more of that. I really thought that, "Hello, George," but no. So I'm still on the phone with her wondering, but I'll play along with anything. I didn't give a shit about anything. Okay, tell me, what do you have to tell me? And then she said the following. She said, "She doesn't know about me, but I want to tell you where I come from." And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm getting a chill through me right now because I'm flashing back to the emotions I felt at that moment. I thought, holy shit, this has got to be Jean. And it's not Jean talking to me, it's someone else. And this she that doesn't know about her, the one that's talking, this is an alter. This is a multiple personality. Turns out a jerk in New Jersey might have one after all. I was just blown away by that, but I kind of collected my wits and I said, "If you're calling to tell me where you come from, please do it. I want to hear exactly where you come from." And then the following story emerged, and I swear to you, I'm almost using her precise words. I'll start in the falsetto, but then I'll go to my normal voice. "I'm in a room. I'm 4 years old. I'm in a room, 4 years old. And there are a lot of adults there. And it seems to be a party. Everybody's in a very good mood. A door opens on the side of the room. And someone comes in with a silver platter. And on the silver platter is a baby boy, my little cousin. And they put the silver platter down on the table and the boy is lying there. Then out of another door, a tall man with a gray beard walks in. And he has a knife in his hands. And he walks up to the table with a little boy. And she's standing right there watching this whole thing, this 4-year-old girl. And he reaches down and he takes the little baby's penis and he cuts it. And blood spurts out of it. And the baby cries in pain. And all the grown-ups cheer and clap and hug each other. "I don't ever want to be like them. I don't want to ever grow up. I will never grow up. I will never grow up." She repeated it again and again and again and again. See, she's explaining to me what happened. She saw a horrific, inexplicable attack upon the most vulnerable part of an infant boy's body. No one explained to her what this was. No one had informed her there was a bris taking place. You can kind of stand outside of it and see from the point of view of the grown-ups that's what this is about. This is where phenomenology is so important, what the experience is. Her experience was not of a bris. Her experience was of something that made no sense, a sadistic attack that all the adults in the room joined in celebrating. It might as well have been a satanic attack in which a baby's being castrated, in terms of what her experience was of the whole thing. So what emerged then, and I won't imitate her words anymore, but she had always been 4-year-old. She's kind of a Peter Pan personality that ceases to age, like the Lost Boys. They live in Neverland. They cease aging. They step out of the temporal flow of life, where you get 5 and 6 and 10 and 14 in adolescence and become an adult. You just cease to age at all. That's what little girl did. And her motivation, her reason for that was because to become an adult is to join in kind of the cult of sadism for enjoying the cruelty against children. And she chose not to partake of that in any way at all. That came to the end. Our conversation came to an end. It was 15, 20 minutes long, that's all. I thanked her for calling me and telling me, "You're welcome." And she hung up, okay? Now what do I do with this information? What do I do with this story that had just been told to me? Something very interesting then happened. I had an appointment with her the following Monday. I didn't know whether to call her back or not, so I decided not to call back or do anything. I had to just wait and see what emerged.